Hello everyone, I'm revisiting Dumuzid. Dumuzid was one of the entries in this year's 7-day roguelike challenge, and it made my top 10, as you may recall if you watched those videos. I've been playing Dumuzid a lot more recently, and I've come to realise that there's a lot more to the game than I initially thought there was. So looking back, I feel like I didn't really do justice to what's actually in the game at the time. In the game's defence, it does include various features which I probably should have probed a bit more into. The little coloured shapes that are scattered around, for instance. I mean, I knew they had to be something, but I couldn't figure out what, and I probably should have realised, based on the fact that the only control method in the game is 4-directional movement, that the shapes were probably something to do with that, and could be activated or otherwise revealed using the 4-directional movement system. However, in my own defence, the game is very opaque. I'm all in favour of not spelling things out for the player, but some hints or indications that something is there would be useful. So I think it's a combination of the fact that the game is a bit more opaque than it needs to be, and that I maybe wasn't as tenacious as I could have been in experimenting to try and reveal these mechanics which turned out to be there. So anyway, I did like the game originally, hence it was in my top 10, but now I know how much more there is to it, I would probably have put it higher up my top 10. So I felt like, the game deserves to be revisited properly. So here we are, Dumuzid. So, I will show you straight away that we have 4-directional movement, and that is literally the only control in the game. We are this black block with an @ symbol in the middle, and as I mentioned in the previous video, enemies will also take the shape of blocks of various colours, but they won't just be one single square like this. They will be bigger and in various shapes, a bit like Tetris blocks. And we can also become so by basically touching or bumping into any enemy that is the same size as us or smaller. We will add them to our own mass. Any enemy that's larger, that's not the case. So here we go, let's try and get him to touch us. Which isn't something I say very often. There we go. So we've absorbed that guy, and we're now a 2-block thing. And I mentioned in the previous video that there are many advantages to being smaller. And the way size works in this is even cleverer than I originally thought. And I'll explain that as we go along here. So there's another small enemy. I'll absorb him. Now, you see these sort of red mesh areas here. I did wonder what those were, and I noticed that sometimes when I walk over them, it will say +1, or something like that. And I didn't get why I could sometimes pick them up and sometimes couldn't. And that's because I was viewing them as pickups. But they're not. He's smaller than us, so we'll be able to absorb him. I don't really want to, because that makes us too big, but here we go. Yes, these aren't pickups. What they are is patterns on the floor. So this is a 1-block pattern. If we were 1 block in size, we could pass over that and we'd get +1 point. You'll also see them like that's a sort of inverted L shape. If we were the same shape and size, we could stand over it like that and we would get more points. That's what those are. And I don't know if the dungeon, in inverted commas, in this game actually has an end, or whether the objective is just to get the highest score you can before you get killed. But there's definitely a score element to this, which seems to be the objective. Now, the size system in this is very, very interesting. Let me explain that for you. All enemies, just like us, have a sort of @ symbol. I'm going to have to knock some of my extra bulk off here. That's what these black diamond things do. There we go. Could do with knocking off a bit more, actually. I'll use this one. There we go. So we can probably get this L-shaped score tile thing over here. Yeah, there we go. 9 points. So, yes, the enemies all have an @ symbol in them, just like we do, which is sort of the core. And if an enemy if an enemy that's bigger than us bumps us, then it absorbs us, just like we absorb them, and that's game over. Or, if an enemy of any size bumps the block that contains our @ symbol, we die. The reverse is also true. We can bump the @ symbol of a much bigger enemy and kill it in one hit. Or we can actually chip away its external blocks, its sort of appendages. If you hit those, you can actually whittle them away and make it smaller and smaller, and eventually kill it or make it small enough for you to absorb. So, being small has the benefit of being manoeuvrable, because of course if you're an enormous sprawling block, you won't be able to fit through these smaller gaps, and you may not even be able to reach the exit. But at the same time, being large is kind of a health system, because it means you can, if you manoeuvre correctly, sustain more hits before you get killed. But size also serves as kind of an inventory system for your magic. There aren't items, but there are spells, and that's what these coloured shapes are. Now watch. When you step over a coloured shape, if you're any bigger than your just core one block, you will actually pick up one spell per sort of spare block. And if it's a circle, that means it's not identified. Different shapes represent different spells. To activate a spell, you do this. Bump the corresponding block into the wall. That one is one that reduces our size, which isn't the greatest one. It can be useful under certain circumstances, but it's not the most useful. Spells also include other effects like actually adding new blocks to you by absorbing them from the wall, or teleporting you randomly, or revealing the whole map. Various spell effects. And the reason I say size works a bit like an inventory system is you can have one spell per sort of extra block of your size. So, yeah, I killed him off. But you see, we chipped away one bit of him and then absorbed him when he became small enough. So for each extra block of your size, you can carry one spell. So at the moment, we have one extra block. We can carry one spell. So if you're huge and you have 10 extra blocks, you can carry 10 spells, but you're also very unwieldy. You'll be easy to hit, and it will be difficult for you to fit through spaces in the corridors. So that's a nice trade-off. Okay, let's just move on to the next level. This is the exit. And I find also that as I play, the larger I get... Let's try this. That was a sort of, I think, enemy clearing spell. Maybe it was a block clearing spell, I forget. I find that as you get bigger, as you absorb more and more enemies... There we go, that cleared out some blocks, cleared out some walls, gave us a bit more space, which is very useful if you are indeed a large shape. No, there we go. Yeah, I find that as you become very, very large, you actually tend to run away from enemies more. That revealed the whole map. Because what tends to happen, or at least the way I play, what tends to happen... there we go. See, I'm too big. I didn't really want to be this big now. Let's trigger this spell. You'll see that I absorbed a spell from an enemy when I absorbed him, which is an interesting feature. This sort of bouncing effect is, I think, you get an extra move every so many turns. I'll knock off some of this bulk here. There we go. Yeah, when you get very large... Let's just leave. When you get very large, what tends to happen is that you will more and more see enemies that are smaller than you, because you are in a position where you're actually bigger than most of the enemies at that point. Which has the interesting side effect that since you probably don't want to absorb these other enemies, which are smaller than you but still pretty large, and make yourself even larger and more cumbersome than you already are, you tend to run away. You go, no, I don't want to touch you, don't want to absorb you, get away from me, get away. So you flee, and it's kind of an interesting twist, because when you're a large shape, you seem like you're powerful, and you have a lot more health and a lot more access to spells, but at the same time, you're kind of more vulnerable. Oh, no, I don't want to be a really long line here. At the same time, you're kind of more vulnerable, because you're then in a position where... wow, this is awful. You're then in a position where any enemy you meet, you will probably have to absorb, which will just make you bigger and bigger and more unwieldy and more vulnerable to getting trapped and having small enemies whittling away your size. So it's an interesting little twist that, in a way, the more powerful you become, also the more vulnerable you become, which means there are definite pros and cons to both being small and being large. Small, you're nimble, but you have almost no health, and you can't really use much in the way of magic. Large, you have a lot of health, and you can use a lot of magic, but you're a very easy target. And you're in a position where you will just become larger and larger and larger as you absorb more and more enemies, because you're bigger than most of them. So this is... Oh, I was absorbed there. So there's so much more to this than I originally realised. And like many of the best designed roguelikes, Dumuzid has really simple mechanics and simple gameplay, but offers a lot of tactical depth with that simplicity. And it's one of those games where it's because you don't have to go through lengthy character generation and there isn't a really convoluted interface. Every time you're absorbed by an enemy or you accidentally get hit on the or whatever, you die, you can jump straight back in. I keep doing that. I keep going, okay, I'll go again, because it's so quick to play and the control is so simple. If I had realised that there was this whole spell system, this looks dangerous. There we go. If I'd realised there was all of this extra stuff to Dumuzid, I think I would have ranked it higher in my top 10 7DRLs, because it's a really, really inventive use of size and shape in roguelikes, which is something we very rarely see. And it actually manages to be a really absorbing tactical game, as well as a sort of geometric puzzly thing. Dumuzid. I recommended it before. I recommend it even more now. And this is my attempt to actually kind of do some justice to the game's design, which I overlooked before in my misunderstanding of the way the game works. So, Dumuzid. I definitely recommend checking it out if you haven't already. One of the strongest entries from this year's 7-Day Roguelike Challenge. Thanks for watching, as always, and rejoin me the next time when we'll be doing more game things. There's going to be more Barony, more WazHack at some point, all kinds of stuff going on the Indie Ocean. So until then, bye for now.